I mean, so in the college classroom, we are, you know, we educate the students that are in our classrooms, but ultimately they are adults and they're responsible for their education. And yeah, you have, you know, 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds in your room, and they should be responsible for what they're doing in their education. But there's times where you will have a kid that just is like, I don't want to do it. And unlike me, where if someone's not going to do it, I say, well, then don't do it. And I try to motivate them, but if they don't want to meet me halfway, I don't have to do it at the university level. In the high school classroom, you guys actually need to do it, and you do it. I mean, like, I haven't been in all your classrooms, but I've been in some of them. In Noah's classroom, I'm always amazed at like how you guys actually are able to motivate students that don't want to do it, and you do it with pump fakes. You know, I mean, I've judged American Idol contests in Noah's classroom where students are developing, you know, songs about the central dogma of molecular biology and other sorts of things. And so, you know, it's things where you have students that just don't want to engage at some level, and it's impressive. And so it's one of those things that the title of this talk is Effective Collaborations Between, and so I don't actually view this as establishing relationships. I view, and I'll say this again later on in the talk, I view collaborations in research and in outreach as being something where both parties bring complementary expertise to the table. And the expertise that I bring is my research lab and the expertise that I have with the type of work that we do, which I'll describe in just a second. But the expertise that you guys bring is, you know what it is that your students are supposed to leave the classroom with. And so when we actually go, and then you also know all and we overlap in the context that we have overlapping interests in the life sciences. And so I view this as university faculty, and it's clear that the ones here that have been talking agree with this sort of point, need to embrace basically the collaborative relationship that can exist between university faculty and secondary educators. So that's sort of that's the summation of the entire talk in about 5 minutes. So if you want to zone out now, you can. Now I'll talk about it for 55 minutes. All right, so let me tell you about who I am and what I do. So I've been at K-State for 10 years now, and my lab has grown and shrunk over the years as money has come in and left. And so these are the people who have done a bunch of this work. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail with the work that we do, but it's worth pointing out that all of these students and postdocs that are on this slide, and undergraduate students, really drive the work that we do. They deserve the majority of the credit. We've gotten money out of various organizations over the years. And the thing that's funny about money when you get a job is that it forces you to think in a more complex manner about how it is that you're going to do effective outreach, instead of just saying that you're just going to do it. It's how are we going to actually do this effectively? Okay, so what my lab does, and just sort of a 3-minute sort of version of what it is that we do in my lab. I'm an evolutionary geneticist, and we're interested broadly in questions that center around natural genetic variation in natural populations. And so I sort of think about this in a very sort of simplistic flow diagram, which we can all think about, which is that the world, all species out there have natural genetic variation, and this natural genetic variation is ultimately the product of some evolutionary history that preceded the moment in which you're sampling that natural genetic variation. This natural genetic variation is ultimately transformed into physiology, components of physiology, morphology, development, life histories, components of phenotype, and then this ultimately gives rise to natural phenotypic variation in populations. And so in my lab, what we're really interested in is not just this first axis of thinking about things, but we're really interested about thinking about things in an ecological context. So we're interested in, if you take natural genetic variation and put it into different environments, what happens to these organisms? So if you take, we primarily work on fruit flies, but if you take an organism and move it into a warm environment or a cool environment or something like that, what happens? What's the genotype bioenvironment interaction? How plastic is the phenotype? And how does that affect the expression of either phenotypes or genetic variation? And then ultimately what we're really interested in is natural selection and adaptation. And so we have natural phenotypic variation is ultimately molded by natural selection, which then changes the natural genetic variation. So all of the projects in our lab sort of bounce around various parts of these arrows. And so we have students working on all of them. And so we do this in a number of different study systems. The primary ones that we do are the two pictures on the top, which is Drosophila melanogaster. We work in a number of different species of flies in my lab, but we've also done collaborative projects over the years that have worked on garter snakes, sunflowers, on clines going from the Manitoba all the way down to Texas. And then we've worked on this dominant blue prairie grass, big blue stem as well. We've had a bunch of collaborative projects on that over the years that we're starting to have some work emerge from. But let me tell you a little bit about the fruit fly work, just because that's sort of the baby of the lab that I work most on. So what motivates what we do in the lab is basically questions about thermal adaptation in natural populations. So the globe up there, the picture of the map up there is just a thermal map that I took off the web. And we all know that the world is a thermally diverse place. Flies live pretty much all over the world. Sorry, Drosophila melanogaster lives pretty much all over the world in all spots that's not covered in ice. So Drosophila melanogaster is a historic African tropical species that moved into Europe and Asia, and then subsequently has colonized the entire planet, into the New World in Australia and South America relatively recently. But they thrive everywhere they go, and they actually do live outside genetics labs. They don't just live inside the labs of genetics researchers at universities. And so this isn't a picture that we took in the lab where we brought something green into the lab. This is actually a picture of a fly outside the lab on something green. And so the point here is that flies are actually real organisms, and we can use them to study adaptation in nature. And the reason that we use them is that although there's lots of really cool organisms that exhibit cool adaptations in natural populations, fruit flies are great because we know so much about the genomes of fruit flies. And so we have, it was one of the first genomes to be sequenced. Probably about 6 years after the original Drosophila melanogaster genome was sequenced, we had 12 Drosophila genomes that were sequenced across the phylogeny that span 50 million years. And now we are in the situation where the community has created our ability to do genomics on a population level, where communities of researchers have gone out and created lines of individuals and sequenced all of the genotypes inside a population. And so it changes the way that we can get at mechanisms that underlie these adaptations. So what we do in my lab is most of the traits that we work on look like this. So there's no axes here, but this would be some trait value here, and this would be some frequency of genotype on the y-axis. And so they're normally distributed traits, and we attribute this to the action of lots of genes and lots of interaction with the environment. And then, broadly speaking, I'm not going to sort of show any results, we ask these sorts of questions in my lab. We ask questions about what are adaptive traits, what are the genes that influence variation in these adaptive traits. And so this is really, the second question is really motivated about understanding the genetic basis of phenotypic responses to natural selection. What are the actual polymorphisms that drive phenotypic responses? And then the last question is sort of this broad, let's understand what we just figured out in the first two parts. So how do they evolve in natural populations, and how do they actually influence the phenotype? So in flies, what's great is that we can do a lot of manipulations where we can, in very controlled ways, manipulate what it is that we're finding in natural populations. So that's the, if you bump into me in an elevator and it's a long elevator ride, what it is that we do in my lab. I wasn't going to talk, I wanted to just introduce that, but what I wanted to also introduce is what we've done over the years in terms of outreach in my lab. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail with this, but So when I got to K-State, as I said earlier, I started writing grants, and in NSF grants, you need to put in broader impacts. And at the time, it was like, well, I'll just create some stuff that will disseminate my research, and then I'll go knock on the door of somebody's classroom and say, hi, I want to talk to your class. Can we interact? And it was so naive when I did that. And so, I mean, I was so naive when I did that. And about 6 or 7 years ago, Carolyn Ferguson, a colleague of mine at Kansas State University, started to put together this this fellowship program, which was to fund graduate students to participate in K-12 education in science classrooms. And it was one of these programs where they took master's level and PhD students, and they put them in with teachers in the Junction City High School, at Junction City High School. And they weren't student teachers, they were, what do you call them, scientific fellows? Yes. It was, okay, yeah, there were scientific fellows in these classrooms. But the thing that was really great about it is that during this time, it forced me to go to a high school classroom. My kids were in school, but I never actually gone in and sort of like observed what was going on in the high school classroom. And out of this emerged sort of the second point, which is these interactions with the faculty at Junction City High School, who have all moved around after I met them all, but some of them are still at Junction City High School. And what it did is it made me realize just how different I needed to think about the way that I was doing broad impacts. I mean, it was one of these things where I had this very naive view of how it was that we should do broader impacts. And as I got to know folks in various secondary education contexts, I realized that that we needed to be collaborative, that they were good at something that I was not all that good at, and I brought something to the table that was different than what they had in their classroom. I also, I'm not going to talk at all about this today, but I run the Research Experience for Undergrads program at Kansas State University, which is a program that supports undergraduate research during the summer as well. So a couple of examples of what we did when we were kicking around Junction City High School and interacting primarily with Noah's classroom. So one of the things that we did was, one of the traits that we're really interested in my lab is a trait called is cold tolerance. And one of the ways that we quantify this trait called cold tolerance is we'll take flies and we throw them on ice, and when you throw a fly on ice, it will conk over and go into a physiologically arrested state called chill coma. You can take that fly out and put it at room temperature, and it will recover from that chill coma. And there's a lot of variation in how quickly the fly will recover from chill coma. So lots of insects do this. You'll see that certain insects you need to get much colder in order to make that happen. But I had a PhD student, Lindsay Fallis, who was in my lab she graduated about 3 or 4 years ago now. And she was working with Noah, and the reason this picture of Argentina's up here was she was interested in South American populations of flies. We had a collaboration that was going on there. And so she brought to the high school classroom her experiences with her research, which was questions about thermal adaptation in South America, and questions about the genetic basis of it. And during the time that she and Noah were working together, they designed this experiment that they conducted over the course. It was the whole year, right? Yeah. You did this. I mean, it lasted. This is generation on the x-axis. So this is a picture that's off of a poster that I'll show you with pictures, and then they're kicking around. They're in the back there if you want to look at the posters that the students actually made. But this is generation, and generation time in flies is 14 days generally from egg to decent-sized population. And on the y-axis here is our trait that we were measuring, which is chill coma recovery time. And so what she did was she took a genetically variable base population, and then every single week there were cohorts of students that would go away and work with Lindsay on doing the selection. So they would put them on ice, and they would let them recover, and they would pick up the ones that recovered quickly, and they would pick up the ones that recovered slowly, and then they would repeat this over and over.
And kill everything in between.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Jar of death.
Yes, yes. They would kill everything in between. We have lots of jars of death, which are essentially low percentage ethanol that you drop flies into and they what we saw is we basically saw this nice response to selection. That we had these individuals that were deemed slow, and these are different. The sexes did basically the same thing. We have some sort of wonky data points in there, and then we have the fast ones. And so we sort of see this response to selection that went on. And what was really awesome about this was, this is just as you've already seen today. I mean, this is sort of one of these things where I'm standing up here expected to sort of talk about the relationship between university researchers and secondary educators, and you just sort of have seen how it should go, and I'm giving you my example of how it's going for us. But they actually collected data here, and the idea is that they needed to draw inference out of this data once they actually did this. And so this excites me because what it does, and what really excites me about what I hear in this meeting, when I interact with high school teachers, and when I interact with my colleagues at K-State, is what's coming to the forefront of sort of science education is the process of actually doing science. That that this is that these interactions can really demonstrate that what we're doing is not just generating knowledge and then just dropping it on people. It's actually demonstrating the way it is that we go about generating hypotheses, coming up with experiments that are going to test those hypotheses, and then drawing inferences from those as we go through these. And it's messy, like this isn't, and this is this isn't sort of one of those canned experiments that I would say that we could develop into a very simple lab in every single high school biology classroom, because this was a bit of a pain in the butt, in that we brought back all these flies and reared them in our labs and other sorts of things. But there's similar sorts of things that could go on to this, and it was exciting because the students were actually generating their own data. Yeah.
Is that seconds on?
That's all right. This is the students didn't label their axes. This is in minutes. So yeah. So it's basically the treatment on a Drosophila, if you want to do this in a reasonable amount of time, is if you hit them with 0 degrees C for 3 hours, it takes about 10 minutes for the average fly to recover. And so this is actually, for people, this is an aside, but if you want to use flies in your classroom, you can use cold treatments to actually keep them down without needing CO2 tanks in your classroom. And so, lots of people know that. But and there's a heck of if you want flies that take a really long time to recover, and you just don't, and you want to do something else with them, contact me, because I have more data about slow recovering flies than anything else.
Are those data points averages?
Yes, those are averages. Yeah.
So once they recover, have the kids catch it.
So the superintendent of Junction City schools likes to joke that I've infested their high school with fruit flies. Yes, well, and so what goes on when a fruit fly recovers is that they will stand on their legs and then they don't actually fly for another couple minutes. And so you can sit there with forceps or with an aspirator and pick them up and toss them into a jar of death so that you don't fill it nicely with flies. But what came out of this, so let me show you some pictures. So they all made posters, and so these are posters that are all sitting around the back of the room, where they were supposed to come up with what it is that they did, what the experiment was, and actually present this to the class. And so it was really cool. And I thought these were lost, but I dug through my lab over the last couple of days and came across these, so I was really excited to find them. Was noted. What I was going to say here was that one of the things that's come out of this interaction with Junction City High School is that they've invested a bunch of money in creating basically a mobile fly lab. So they've got a cart that they can roll around. It's got a CO2 tank on it, and they've got a small number of incubators. They've gotten money from DOD that's been able to fund this sort of stuff, but at the same time, they're trying to actually start incorporating the model organism Drosophila into a lot of their different exercises. And this is some of the interactions that I've had with Becky Steiner and other sorts of folks. I also had another PhD student who worked with Noah, and basically what he was doing was he was really interested in the angle in my lab that focuses on genotype by environment interactions. And so I didn't have a simple set of pictures, so I just stuck it poster on here, which I know is a bad snafu for actually looking at. But the gist is that he was interested in genotype by environment interactions. And so he and Noah decided that they should work on Daphnia, because Daphnia has really interesting genotype by environment interactions. And so they did a bunch of experiments where they were doing Daphnia's response to the environment. So if you put in predatory cues into developing Daphnia, they will develop different morphologies, and you'll be able to see that out of the exact same genotypes, you get radically different morphologies, ones that develop these armored hood-like structures at the top of their body, and others that don't in the absence of predators. And so the other reason I added this into the talk was that this was, in my lab, we've had interactions between universities nearby, but when Noah and Paul developed this idea to do this Daphnia work, I don't work on Daphnia, Noah doesn't work on Daphnia, they were sort of like, Daphnia would be great to do this. And so the two of them basically said, we need to find somebody who could help us with Daphnia. And so they emailed Dr. Lawrence Wider, who is at University of Oklahoma, and he was like, yeah, that sounds great. You know, why don't we talk? Why don't we have a conversation? And I can send you some Daphnia. I can send you the protocols that we use to establish these sorts of things, and you guys can use them in the classroom. And so one of the themes that's going to sort of come through here is that the interaction that goes on between university researchers and secondary educators needs to be collaborative, but it's also one of those things that just needs to happen, in my opinion. You know, it's one of those things that there will be times when university faculty reach out to you because for one reason or another we're trying to do outreach sorts of things, but it can go both ways. You know, like if you need something from us, all of us are willing and want to help advance the teaching of the life sciences at all levels. And so we're all really passionate about this, as you've seen previously. So if there are things, and you come across one of our websites that you want to engage us with, just ask. And this is a very good example of that. And so with GK12, when they had enormously deep pockets, they actually flew Noah and Paul down to the Oklahoma Biological Station for a couple of days, and they hung out with Larry's lab and figured out how all this stuff would work. We've also done interactions with the Junction City High School teachers, which we did this Drosophila boot camp. And so here's Drew and Noah and Becky in the lab. Drew is trying to take pictures through my microscope with his phone, which works really well. I didn't know that until Drew was in the lab, but what we did in this was we spent some time this couple days that they were in the lab just brainstorming about ways that we could use flies for what they were wanting to do. And we dropped the ball a little bit on this, but it's one of these things that we did stuff like, we went through how it is that we make media, and we went through, how it is we push flies and what it is that you need, and we talked about logistics of, if you actually decide to use flies in the classroom, what is it that we can provide, and what is it that you're going to have to do on your own? And so it was all these different types of things, and it was a very nice collaboration where we're just putting our heads together and trying to push things forward. So these are sort of the examples of things that we've been up to associated with my lab. But I wanted to just sort of drive home a few points, and they're sort of, as I was writing them, I was like, these are really dumb points, because these are just sort of points that are just about how collaborations work in general. But I think they're important points to emphasize to this audience, and I honestly think they're important points that I need to emphasize to my colleagues at my university and at subsequent universities, which is, what is it that, why are these collaborations important? What is an effective collaboration? How do we do this? And what's my vision for sort of the future of these sorts of things and why we need to do this? And so this is where I want some feedback and thoughts. And so, the first question is, why should we build collaboration between secondary educators and university researchers? And so On the next slide, I have a whole bunch of thoughts, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Having sat through the first morning of talks, what do people want? Yeah.
Well,
Jump right in. I love it.
well, I have a question.
Yeah.
As I see that you have fruit flies up there, what comes to my mind is, and I'd just like an opinion on this, just from everyone, I guess, too. My experience with fruit flies is I've been breeding fruit flies for a very long time, and I too am always accused of bringing all the fruit flies into the building.
Yeah.
So, but
it's really the
is this still what we expect from NGSS is to do? I mean, I feel like, I want that my students to have that experience. They can say they bred fruit flies when they get to college, and is that still a good idea? Or are we looking more at, should we be headed towards some kind of research with them and not try to do some of those previous things?
I don't know the answer to that question. Okay, jump right in.
I think fruit flies are a model, and you can use them all year long in whatever way that you choose. And so for us, and if I was going to NGSS it up more than I did back then, because I didn't know about it, was I would show the kids, here's a phenotype. This whole tolerance, waking up process, and I would say, we want to show that selection occurs or something. But I'd let the students design more of it, and I'd let them figure out. And they're going to be wrong. Like 90% of the kids are probably going to be wrong, but it's definitely a part of it. But I think that using fruit flies as your model, keep doing that.
The thing that's really interesting about your question is that it's, what's the utility of sort of breeding the flies, and the reality of things is that I think the utility is that they're actually doing experiments with real organisms, and that they're collecting real data. I mean, just as you saw earlier, it can be a fruit fly or fungus or a prairie or whatever it might be, but they're designing experiments and coming up with hypotheses that they want to test with their experiments and then drawing inferences from that. And then, whether or not you have the ability of every single student to replicate the experiment, or you replicate across the classroom by having lots of different people do the same thing, you can then, there's all sorts of openings that you can have to talk about, how it is that you draw inference in scientific experiments. And so, and I think that's, you could get that out of an exercise that didn't involve a real organism. But at the same time, there's the process of doing science, especially in the life sciences, centers around the manipulation and experimentation with actual real organisms. And so I think that's the I agree with the model is sort of that it is. Hang on one second. Did you have a point that you wanted to add to this?
I'm just one of my students that are some of the fortunate people who got to participate in that program, which I just realized.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, I know they talked about trying to write another grant to continue with the K-12 program.
So it's not, so at K-State level, it's starting to peter out, but at the same, so there's many levels of sort of who's impacted by the GK-12 program, because there's the classroom and the students, there's the faculty and their outreach, and then there's the graduate students. And all of these connections got formed in the place where money is needed to keep the program going is sort of at almost all of those levels, except for the faculty part. They don't give us money. And so I think there's going to be an effort to try and maintain the interaction between the high school teachers and the faculty. The graduate students cost a lot of money. And so if you're trying to find the amount of money that can sort of keep the program going loosely, but I know that Junction City has been landing a bunch of DOT money that also, so I don't know exactly what the status of it is, but GK-12 died the year after, as a program at NSF, died the year after that K-State got funded by it. So it doesn't actually exist anymore. But it's one of these things that the foundation that was formed by GK-12 was so important that many of us are trying to advocate to our administration that this is a component of graduate education that we need to support. And even if it's at some much smaller level than what it was previously. But it was only like 5 fellows that we put in every year.
So if you were interested in trying to continue it at the faculty, college faculty and the high
Yeah.
school teacher level, how would you go about that? How would you contact professors that maybe are interested in doing?
I can answer that. You cold call them.
Yep, that's where I was going. Yeah, I've got a slide at the very end that says, how do you do this? And it's got all these like programmatic things, and then it's like email and phone call. You know, and then if they're jerks, then you don't call them back. If they're nice, then you know, like we want to interact. And so, you know, but you will, there's variance amongst your colleagues, and there's variance amongst our colleagues.
If their kids are in your classes, you got hope.
Yes, that's right. Drew had a comment, sorry.
Yeah, just a quick one.
But
Based off what Noah was saying, like you can get a fly lab online that will generate randomized data, which is cool if the point is to teach them that when you breed through the F2 generation, you're going to get this ratio of outcomes. But that doesn't ever teach them what happens when inevitably it's going to fail. And so there's no problem solving done by these students. And I think like if there is a problem with #kids these days, is that they don't respond well to something that's going to make them persevere and persist through a problem, and they just look for the quickest solution, and that's normally to say screw it and move into something else like accounting.
Well, no, the problem solving itself.
Yeah.
They don't have to. They'll go, well, what do I do now? And all along, teachers have told them what
The
to
reality of it is
do.
that, and then I'll let everybody who's wanting to say something else as well say something. The reality of things is that by having them work on a real organism, you're actually showing them how science is actually done. You know, like when my lab gets funded, I'd love it if I could generate a computer program that would just randomize my data and then pop out what it is that, you know, I draw inferences from, because then it would save me all this money and I wouldn't have to run a whole lab and all this sort of stuff. But that's not actually how we draw inference. You know, I mean, there are, you know, research enterprises that are centered around simulation of data, but they're based on observations that we've made from real actual experiments. Okay.
Well, yeah, so I was going to make an observation, and it's along those similar lines of thinking about what would be helpful coming from university support here. And I'm thinking, because I've been furiously typing about as fast as presenters are going up front all morning to my students back at home on my community saying, here's an idea we can plug into the lab here. Here's something else they know they can plug in here. And it's just the depth of your experience in specific fields will help us know how to solve problems that I don't know about. Like, I'm trying to culture soil microbes, but I don't even know about potato dextrose plates. That was news to me. So I'm Wikipediaing potato dextrose plates. And I don't have need of a walkthrough of a step-by-step lesson of here's what you can plug into my classroom, tell me what to do. I personally am specifically turned off by that. But
Yes.
if you can give us some of your contextual knowledge of here are the ways that I raise organisms, here are the kinds of things that I look for in getting cold drunk, and here are the bizarre eccentricities of just what I've seen. I don't know that you can put all that on paper, but that's what's really valuable to me as a teacher trying to support students, because if we're going to move this away from, because I do the fly lab that Lisa mentioned, I do that, the breeding, and I'd like to get into like the evolutionary studies, but it requires contextual knowledge to be able to provide the framework for students so they're not shutting down when they struggle. So it's your depth of knowledge. I don't know what I'm going to need from you, but I am pretty certain I'm going to need something from you before I get to the end of the procedure.
It is basically, that gets at the collaborative nature of what this is. I mean, because you guys don't need us to tell you how to teach biology. You know, you all do that. You know, you do it well. And you know, what we bring is you know, the current state of scientific inquiry in the fields that we all work in, you know, and so in science is advancing really fast, you know. I mean, like the pace of science is going extremely fast right now. Scientific literacy in this country is not keeping up with the pace of science in this country, and you guys are, this is my last slide to talk, you guys are at the front line of all of this, you know, and so it's like interaction between us is really something that could really help. Pat.
I was just going to respond to you and tell you that what I do with some of my students, especially when they're doing science fair, but it could be you personally too. If you look at the university, under each professor, they'll tell what their major expertise is and what their research is. And just call, every time we've called up, they're more than willing. And the only time I've had researchers come to me and say, hey, I really need to implement something, they got a grant going and they need an educational component. And even then, they're asking how, well, here's my idea, what could we, and they ask, how would you do this? But if they're not doing that, then you just call them up and then they're more than happy to say, here's what I know, can you use any of this? They've been really, really helpful. I have never had anybody from the university not willing to help.
I would agree with that, and even though I'm kind of conscious about it, but I mean, it's exactly, what the other day, I was Ben being out of the prairie, I need something, we need something. And he just is like, and then, well, but you're like, okay, here's a protocol.
But just to reiterate what Ted was saying and what he's got up there on the screen, the directionality of how students matriculate is not lost upon us at the university. We're going to have some of your students, right? Immediately, like next step, right? So it pays for us, apart from needing you for grants and broader impacts, it pays for us to make sure your students are well educated, right? So there's no problem, not only is there no problem in cold calling them, you have a bargaining chip. Some of your students are going to be their students soon. And if they understand so little about science, our classes are going to be infuriating. We're going to hate teaching, right? Because you're going to be like, how do you not know this?
And the other part of that is, I mean, we're changing things at the high school, I mean, the whole K through 12 science structure about how we're teaching. And, there's pressure for us to teach students the way they're going to be taught in college. But I think what we're doing is going to move up. And students are going to be demanding more.
That's right.
Interaction and real stuff.
Talking about in your high school classroom, actually doing, experiments where they're drawing the, generating hypotheses and drawing the inference. When I went to college, it was some of us that did undergraduate research in college, but it wasn't the norm, and it's like, now, when students come to college and they do biology degrees, we really encourage students to get involved in undergraduate research. It's a major part. It's like if you just do coursework, you're cutting yourself short. Like you need to go, and it's the same. I mean, faculty respond to undergraduates the same way they respond to cold college from other folks. And this is a really it's a different subject, but it's they're nervous about talking to us as well. And there's a lot of folks that just don't because they don't want to, walk into somebody's office and have that sort of scary interaction because we're scary folks. Yeah.
So it always seems to me that one of the best things that collaboration brings is it's not just the context that Mike was talking about, but it's more what you were talking about. You're on the edge where the questions are.
You live in an environment that's so rich in questions, you have no idea what it was like in the old days when you didn't have a question. You have so many questions. And these folks out here are in their classroom with their students and wanting, okay, so what's your question? And the kid goes, that's exactly what so you can actually take them into realms with accessible questions that will answer some things you're wanting to learn as well, or they may take you someplace. But the fact is that's what you do better than anything. And that's what you have to get out in your collaboration. That you don't actually have to get it in somebody's classroom to do. If you could help them find questions for their kids to investigate that are reasonable.
Yeah.
That's huge.
I'd like to comment on something just from my very brief experience of interacting with Julie at Free State and some with Peggy and Helen at KU. How excited the students were, or like just by saying, oh, this person's from KU, or this is a college professor, or even this is an undergrad student.
Yeah.
High school kids are like, whoa, like this is the coolest thing I've ever done, or like, even if it's not, they don't think it's cool, they're like, man, I better behave, because this person from KU's here, they're gonna judge me. So, not saying that it's like threatening to students or anything, but when I was just an undergrad helping Dr. Helen at Alexandra out, and I had like 7, I think, of Julie's high school kids in the middle of the summer
Yeah.
that I would go pick up to come out to this barren prairie and plots. Well, no, not even data. We
Yeah.
were like plotting just
Yeah.
stakes after they had run cross country practice and all this hot weather. But they were like so excited and engaged with it. And I mean, I think even if you don't get some amazing newfound discovery or all this awesome information, just having students like actually be excited about it for me, and like I said, this was like 2 weeks experience, but I was like, wow, these kids are really excited about this. This is awesome.
And it's funny, I just did a lunch up at KU with the Grub Club, the International Science students there, and they were not very many turned out, but they were just, they didn't really have any questions for me. And I just, I didn't even write anything to say, but my point was, let's collaborate, because really, I mean, it's like anything, we get all those different perspectives.
Yes.
And like Peggy's work with, and Ben's work with little kids, like that so
Yeah.
helps, because you understand some of my students are at that level, and some of them are up here, and it really helps to be able to, we're hoping to have younger students come out, so that what you guys taught my students, they can teach younger, because people really look
Right.
up to
That's
the
right.
level just above them, like, oh, I could look there. I can't look to you because you're over 50.
This is
You're
the
like,
thing
"Wait,
with the teaching of science, in my opinion, is that you need to just get rid of the idea that scientists are special people. You know, that they're, oh, it's just done by people that are at university. You know, that if you get it to the point where, fourth graders are out there, on prairies, or kindergartners, or, I mean, it's like every sort of level is like, next year I get to go on the trip that goes out to the prairie, or I get to, compare fruit fly color eyes, or whatever it might be. It's that, science, and this is one of my parental pet peeves, is when I'm in elementary classrooms and they say, well, for science, they go to so-and-so's class. And I'm like, it's second grade science. Like, anybody can do it. Come on, like, let's just go outside and collect some stuff. Like, don't make it sound that they go someplace special to do science, because anyone could do it. Like, all we have to do is generate questions. And so we should stop creating this feeling, this feeling that people that do science are special. I mean, I like that we're all doing science, and I like to think that we're special, but at the same time, like, I think it does a disservice to science in general. Go ahead.
Yeah, on that same note, I took students out to lots at Free State last year, and my students, my freshman K students, were just so excited that they were contributing to science.
Yeah.
They were helping discover things.
Yeah.
And they talked about it. These freshman kids who were like not usually talking about science, they were really excited about it.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah,
They were
really
awesome. They're awesome. We still need to crunch the data though.
Yeah. Still want to contribute.
You didn't
Yes,
crunch the
yes.
data.
So how many people are, so I've heard a lot of people from like Manhattan, Junction City area, and Lawrence area. Where are other people? Are people from further distances from, university?
Goddard,
Okay,
KZK,
okay,
Topeka.
Topeka. So it's one of these things that in Kansas, there's enough universities around that you probably can find one relatively close. But I would also argue that you don't have to be close to a university to actually use the collaborations with university faculty. That there are ways to sort of, get bang for your buck, even if there's geographic separation between university faculty. And I think that faculty are willing to do this, and so it's one of those things that that reaching out is a really.
Even Skyping. I mean,
Yep, that's exactly right.
Scientists in Kenya or something. I mean, why not?
That's exactly right. Okay, that was awesome. Okay, here was my thoughts in case you didn't say anything. So why collaborate? My thoughts. We're both experts. We complement each other. From a federally funded perspective, there are research grants that could be helped by having people involved in them. One thing I'll say about that is if someone comes to you and says, I want you to help me with my broader impacts, and I want you to blah, 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 during the summer, make sure that, so in the broader impact section, you can write down salary for participants. And so part of being collaborative is that you treat each other as professionals. And one of the ways that some of my colleagues treat interactions with secondary educators, they say, well, we're going to interact, but all of the money is going towards the intellectual merit research side of the grant. And if there's broader impacts activities, they don't actually write in money for them. You know, if you need to spend 2 weeks with the faculty member that you're working with, you should get paid during those 2 weeks. And so if there's some tangible product that comes out of that, and so you should know that they can write that money into grants, and they should. The funding rate for grants nowadays is astronomically low, so they probably won't get these grants. But that said, they should treat you in that manner. And so that's one of the things that, other things that we touched on. So it keeps classrooms potentially at the cutting edge. I really like the idea that the fact that it demonstrates and supports science and hypothesis-driven inquiry. One of the things that was brought up in Ben's talk and others is that, you know, aligning our outreach activities with what it is that we're supposed to do as a state from the perspective of state standards. You know, we're university faculty, we can look up the standards, but you guys live this, you know? And so it's one of these things that if we can just collaborate, you can say, well, that doesn't actually hit the points that we need to hit. We need to modify it like this. That's much more helpful and fruitful than other things. Other reasons to do it is that it's tons of fun. And it's way more effective than working alone. So these are sort of my thoughts. And then we sort of hit on everything else I was going to talk about, but I'll flip through some slides. All right, effective collaboration. So I already said this, but I'll just write down my thoughts and stuff on effective collaboration. So I've collaborated on a bazillion things in the time that I've been an undergrad, grad student, postdoc, and faculty member. And collaboration is supposed to be when working with experts of complementary expertise and solve problems of shared interest. But there's horrible collaborations and there's awesome collaborations. And so let me just tell you 2 stories about horrible collaborations and awful collaborations. And I'm not going to go into like details. Then Bob did this. And but my example of horrible collaborations is basically a one-way collaboration where people are just involved in the research project, but they don't actually bring anything to the table, or they don't contribute when they come to the table. And so collaboration needs to be that both parties are bringing stuff to the table. So when I was, you know, earlier in my career, I had a number of collaborations where there was just sort of like these sponges that were, you know, that were attached to research projects that were technically collaborating on these projects, but they weren't really offering anything. And so it's not good. Later in my research career, I've had really effective collaboration. So recently, one of the things that we do in our lab, we do genomics, we do evolutionary biology, and we're really interested in how evolutionary biology and genomics interact to influence physiological processes that then influence phenotypes. And so I'm an evolutionary biologist and a geneticist. I am not a physiologist. So if you ask me how an insect works in terms of its physiology, I will open a book and start reading as to how it works. So when I collaborate with physiologists, it's phenomenal because they know all this stuff about how flies work from a physiological perspective, and I know all this stuff about how they work from a genetic perspective. And when we work together, we make discoveries that are different than what it is that we could have made each of us in isolation. And I equate what goes on with collaboration between secondary educators and university researchers is very similar to that we bring different skill sets to the table. We overlap in our interest in life sciences. And so when we bring those to the table, this should be a very effective collaboration. All right. So in theory, it should be easy to build these effective collaborations because we all just sort of talked about them. And so this should just all fall into place. And you know, and we know why it should fall into place. We're both professionals. We have similar goals of advancing the understanding of advancing the world's understanding of the life sciences. We have complementary strengths. But what actually happens in reality is that it's difficult to put these things together. And so I'll just reemphasize this because I've said this already, but when collaborating with a university faculty member, force the fact that it needs to actually be a balanced collaboration. You know, that you both go into it with sort of both sides playing an equal role. You know, this statement of the lowly high school teachers, you know, you're going into this with equal footing, and you bring a significant amount of stuff to the table when you come and interact with us, or we come and interact with you. Like it's and every one of these horrible collaborations, which I sort of broadly define one of my horrible collaborations, was a fantastically asymmetrical collaboration where individuals are, one individual or a couple individuals are doing all the work and there's a bunch of people who are not actually. Other things that kill collaborations, at least in my experience, are a lack of defined goals. So it's like we're all pressed for time. The next point is finding time, money, and groups that get along. But we're all pressed for time and money and all these sorts of things. But in my experience with every single collaboration I've ever done, if I come up with a defined set of what it is that we're actually trying to get out of it, and some sort of time period as to when it is that we want to actually produce that, it really helps shuttle things along in a manner where we get things done. So I have a great collaboration with Noah. We never come up with defined goals, and we never finish anything. I love interacting with him, but every year at parent-teacher conferences, I wander by and I go, hey, how's it going, Noah? When are we going to start developing those fly labs? And then we talk about it, and then we meet every once in a while and have a beer, and then it sort of rotates around. And so, coming up with defined goals is a very useful. All right, so a couple other things that I probably already. So how do we do this? How do you build effective collaboration? This was what came up in the phone. So there's programmatic mechanisms that exist at universities. So there's some at KU, there's some at K-State that exist. They ebb and flow depending on funding situations. Some of them are institutional at universities. Some of them are just associated with grants. There are research experiences for teacher opportunities that exist out there. So these are things that you can actually bring up with, so whether or not it's that you want to go to, that you can go to a university research and actually say, I want to do research. Like I want to come to your lab for the summer and actually just do a research project. And that's a different way that you could interact with us. It doesn't always have to be stuff that goes directly from our labs to some sort of lesson. It could be some sort of broader professional development. But the thing that I would say, and I would reiterate, is that pick up the phone and call. It's just like, just knock on doors. University researchers want to interact, and they will reach out at some level to the community. But if you want something out of them, and you know that we're doing something in our lab that's of interest to things that are going on in your classroom, give us a ring, and like I said, like most of us will be more than willing to chat and to help. The ones that aren't, you'll find every once in a while. We'll call it back. Yeah. So then the thing I would just point out is that I've said already, but all of these things require time, money, and enthusiasm, and all of these things are not immediately available at the instant that you might want them. And so, the enthusiasm part needs to sort of rule the day because sometimes the time or money part isn't actually there. And so figuring out a way that you can carve out each of those things. And if you're actually collaborating with the faculty member, you should be able to figure out how it's in both of your best interests for what it is that you're trying to do. All right. Last couple things. So the future. So my take on this is that the best times is the worst times. Science is advancing really fast. We're making discoveries about everything. We're sequencing, so I'm genomically biased here. We are sequencing genomes left and right. We are in an age where data is flowing in faster than we can make sense out of it. That's where sort of the current state of scientific inquiry sits in the life sciences. But scientific literacy in the general public is shockingly low, and the acceptance of science in the public is shockingly low. It's terrifying. I mean, it's just watch presidential candidates talk about science, and it just makes your head explode. And this is depressing. And it's not just that the candidates are doing this; it's broadly speaking. And secondary educators are in my opinion, the most effective communicators of science. With the most diverse audience. You have a big captive audience of folks that is going to be in your classroom every single day, and this is the part that really excites me because I think it could stop this second point. I mean, you guys have been doing this for a long time, so this has happened in in spite of your guys' great efforts that have gone on over time, but we can't give up on the fact, like, we have this sort of dichotomy between what's going on in the current state of science and what's going on in our understanding of science. And I'm not actually sure how to solve that. I mean, that's something that potentially over lunch we could talk more about in those kind of questions. But yeah, so that's sort of where I see the future. I mean, we need to be interacting. It would help, I think, university researchers. It would also help secondary educators. And ultimately the goal, you know, I mean, there's all these sort of like direct, sort of semi-selfish goals that we can all kind of come up with. But we don't want a dumb society, you know? I mean, is the thing. I mean, whether or not they become biologists or doctors or whatever it is, or, you know, an accountant, you know, or president, you know, like we'd like people to actually understand how science works. And so, you know, you guys all interact with people that are all taking science classes, whether or not they're going to become a science major or not become a science major. We are a little bit more narrowly defined at universities as to who it is that we interact with. But putting that basis of scientific literacy in the population is something that needs to happen, just from a, you know, save the world sort of standpoint. All right, take home points. I work on evolutionary biology. That's not really all that important, but that's what I said at the beginning. The relationships between faculty and secondary educators must be collaborative. So these aren't just relationships that are just sort of one-way sort of things. The defined goals in the collaboration that benefits both parties needs to be in every single one of these things. And seek out collaborations because we benefit from these interactions, and just call us, we'll do it. You know, we want to have these interactions. That's all I have to say. I really appreciate the invite, and I'd be happy to take questions, talk about content. Thank you.
I think we're gonna have to make it a lunch talk,
That's
because otherwise, based on the little time you gave people to talk a minute
Yes.
ago, like, blew it up, so. Yes, go ahead.
Kelly Sewell is going to take 1 minute of our time, or maybe 2 minutes of our time. To
Oh, yeah.
introduce the outstanding biology
Yeah,
teacher.
no. I could do it in 60 seconds. Don't time.
Jump right
Do
in.
we have any
I'm
more
done.
questions for?
We'll talk at lunch. Yes, thank you.
I am the Kansas representative for NABT for the OBTA process, which is the